Hello, y'all. Well, let's talk about called ethics in engineering. Might not get you excited at first, but this is actually something that's pretty dang important. As an engineer, you're going to be put in situations where you have to decide what to do and what's the right decision to make, and that's really what this is about. So, hope you find this interesting. So, why are we discussing ethics in engineering? Well, this is because as engineers, you're going to shape the future. You're literally going to build the future. And as a result, engineers have responsibility that other disciplines do not, such as even business or art. As a result, you've come up with the standards of and protocols for how engineers operate. This includes certification, and if becoming a professional engineer. And even then, they provide their own code. This includes, for example, here, National Society of Professional Engineers has a code where engineers must perform under a standard of professionalism and behavior that requires adherence to the highest principles of ethical conduct. Why does this matter? Because people, money, and reputation. Yeah, I'll get to that in just a second here. But being a presentation class, we're just going to touch on this subject for the team presentations. This actual subject could be a whole class in itself. But I want to discuss it because it's core to everything you will do in your career, both in how you design whatever aspect of engineering you're going to, but also how you will build your reputation and the decisions you'll make in the future. So why ethics matters? Well, it can save lives, which is really important. It can save a lot of money or cost a lot of money based upon the decisions that are made. And also, it can save or cost you your career. One of the examples we have here is just think about the Boeing 737 MAX 8. Two planes crashed because of the onboard system that was programmed to save the airplane had an opposite effect. This has cost Boeing a tremendous amount of money and even has resulted in the loss of career of several people, including the vice president in charge of the commercial airplane division, and calls for the CEO of Boeing to resign. So that's why ethics matter. It could also be the case where it's the law. When bad things happen, there's always finger pointing, and the engineer is one of the people they point to. So one of the analogies I have, why ethics matter, it's all about having a common core of beliefs from which everybody to work on. And one of the examples I came up with is an airline pilot analogy, where you're the captain of a flight about to carry 400 passengers across an ocean. You're just getting in this airplane that someone else has designed, that you're going to work through this system where other people will guide you, and hopefully everything works to get to the other side. And it's this common belief and common core of values that the captain wants. So he wants to be assured that everyone, his crew, including his flight attendants, are trained to fly the airplane, that the airplane has been maintained, it's safe and capable. If not, that the mechanics have done their due diligence in order to report any issues with the plane, that those handling the airplane have been trained and capable, that they would not come across to touch the airplane without being trained and have the certificates they need to be on that ramp, and that the system, this includes air traffic controls, weather, even dispatch at the airline, that the system the aircraft will fly through is safe and capable. And then finally, that all regulations and rules have been followed. There's this ethical basis where everybody follows the same rules that makes that international flight successful. And in fact, a breakdown in any one part puts that whole flight into jeopardy. For example, here's a few solutions. The worst airline disaster ever was when two 747s collided in the 1970s. It was a miscommunication between pilots and air traffic control that led to, with a weather breakdown. Not everybody was adhering to the rules properly, and as a result, two airplanes crashed. That's a lot of times what happens with ethics. When not everybody is adhering to the same code, the results are bad things happen. Another example here this is American Airlines 191 in Chicago, where a mechanical maintenance procedure that was authorized by the airline was being followed, but actually originally was recommended by McDonnell Douglas, the maker of the airplane. McDonnell Douglas changed the recommendation, but American Airlines kept removing engines in an improper way, and as a result, close to 200 people died in this very dramatic crash in Chicago. The reason is American wasn't following the same protocol that all the other airlines were in how to maintain the airplanes. It wasn't ethics, but their values were different. Another example is Pan Am 103. This is where security did not do the proper, had a different plan than the rest of the airline, and as a result, well over 250 people died in that incident. And then even Malaysian Airlines Flight 17, which was just a few years ago, got shot down. It was trying to follow the proper procedures, but although never, I don't believe the Russians were ever convicted, but the code that was proper protocols weren't being followed, and as a result, close to 300 people died. Actually, over 300 people died on that flight. And that's where it goes back to, if everybody's not on the same page, sharing the same values, bad things happen. So let's talk about ethical theory. It's not just about the facts, but as I mentioned, about the values. Facts can be interpreted so many different ways, and I have a few examples ahead. That's why how you interpret those facts or the morals that will determine what is right. It also provides a foundation from which to anchor decisions. For example, the challenge is, how do we consider what is acceptable, what is expected, who is responsible? You think these are simple questions, but in different societies and different cultures, this can always mean something. And even when someone has their own personal agenda, it can mean something completely different. So this is the reason that ethics are important. An example here is ethanol. You hear about biofuel, biodiesel being so green, but is it? And the reason it's an important question is because it depends on who you ask. What are their priorities? What are their values? If you're comparing it to true oil-based fuel, well, it is a green solution. It's also great for Midwest farmers because it actually ups the price of corn. So to those two groups, biodiesel or ethanol is a great product that they value highly. But to others, it's still very efficient. It still ultimately puts CO2 in the air. It's actually very inefficient for creation of energy. For every 1 unit of input, it only creates 1.5 units of energy. Compare that to solar or wind or geothermal, where it's 20 units of energy for one input. So that results in much cleaner sources of energy that are available. So is it really the best solution? It depends on who you ask. And that's where the values come into play. So the challenge is with ethics, there is no real answer. One of the things you hear over and over is the age of fake news, where we're not really sure that something is true or that's really not true. It depends on who you ask and how it's being interpreted. And then on top of it, you aren't being purposely deceived. It's the value system. When you hear fake news, it's really the value system that is being questioned all the time. And as I mentioned, facts are facts, but not how they're interpreted matters. And if you have any questions about this, just watch, especially politics. Fox News will have one interpretation, CNN will have another interpretation, and Reddit would have a completely different interpretation. Even discussing the same fact, but the interpretation would be completely different. And that's what makes ethics so difficult. But we find by agreeing to a set standard beliefs that we can find it. There's two main sets of theory that engineering falls under. One is contractuarianism. I can't say it too well. Contractarianism. There's a video on that. Then utilitarianism is pretty much one of the standard theories where you want to maximize the benefit for all. The first one, I'm going to say that over, is more of you have an obligation. You've signed up for an obligation and you need to fulfill that obligation. Utilitarianism looks more towards the benefits of what you're doing. So how do we find common beliefs which to base our ethics? Well, it depends. Religion, you'd find this through the Bible, teachings, spiritual leaders. Academia does this with accepted standards and practices. For example, you're all working towards degrees. This is saying everybody has this set standard. You've achieved it. For the universities themselves, they go for accreditation and to prove that they have the practices and values in order to create a solid student. Engineering itself does this through certification and societies, as I mentioned before. Sometimes just being certified as a professional engineer. And even legal does this in laws, arguments, and court rulings. So what you'll actually find is a lot of times the industry standards are already out there for what you should follow. The good news is, for large corporations specifically, you have what's called the Code of Conduct. This sets out the guidelines, what the company expects you to do, and often addresses the issue of employees when they engage with those outside the company. This could be customers, vendors, etc. But it also includes how to interact within the company, how to make decisions where ethics are involved. And here I have the example from Boeing, which I can actually use for the case study. So large companies will typically have it formally established. Smaller companies, you may need to read it and interpret it in the company's culture. This is good or bad. It depends on this is where culture becomes a big issue. But probably in a small company, you wouldn't necessarily find anything written. Engineering certification, as I mentioned, typically includes ethical codes. And at the lowest level, no matter what organization, law and court rulings, I've already set a precedence of what you can do, but that's at the bare minimum of ethical compliance. Alrighty, so let's talk about the next steps. Well, there's 3 videos to watch. The first is on utilitarianism, which was a crash course on that philosophy, followed by a crash course on contractuarism. You know, I have a hard time with that word. And then follow that by a TED Talk on engineering ethics. That is about 30 minutes of videos. Then I have a case study to read, which I created called, based upon you as an engineer on the Curtiss C-83 Starflight, which is a hypersonic aircraft in the future. And based upon that, you'll complete the essay questions. All right, so this case study, case study really for ethics is the best way to put you in a situation where you'll face an ethical question and there is no exact right answer. You just have to evaluate all the options to you. So that's why we came up with the case of the Curtiss C-83 Starlight hypersonic aircraft. You can see my imagination was going a little crazy here. And the background is, as part of the case study, you've just been hired by the company. And as an engineer, you'll have to navigate some ethical questions that arise during employment. The challenge is rarely is there truly a good, bad decision. Most times, it'll be based upon the morals interpretation of regulations. So for those of you, if you need something to come off, to have that decision about what you do, I have included Boeing's own Code of Conduct as a reference for the Curtiss Aircraft Corporation. So hope you guys enjoy the case study. And that's it for this lecture. Look forward to talking all on Wednesday. Bye.